business. I see we have a few people here. Can you all hear us okay? Can you say hello in the chat room? Hey, there we go. Hi,
Hello.
everybody.
Yay.
Well, I'm really excited to be here with Tracy today because she has run many different types of jewelry businesses over the years,
Yes.
and she's coached tons of jewelry business owners. So she is the person to go to if you ever want advice on how to do a jewelry business. So I'm really happy that she had time to talk with us because you're such a great resource for everyone. So before we jump in, can you tell everybody a little bit about what you do at Flourish and Thrive?
Yeah, sure. So I co-founded Flourish and Thrive with my friend Robin Kramer, and our mission is to empower and teach jewelry designers how to run successful businesses and create desire and demand for their brand so that they are creating unforgettable brands that people remember forever. So we do that with online training courses. We have a high-level mastermind, and then we have a ton of free resources as well.
Awesome. And if you guys have a chance, we'll send around the link and you can check out their website. But they have tons of free resources and videos and on every topic related to jewelry. So Tracy, can you talk about when you started your first jewelry business, kind of how that came about?
Sure. Yeah, it was back in the 90s, back in the like ancient times. Kind of fell upon jewelry in university when I was taking a fine arts class. I had fine arts classes as electives, and the first class that I took was a jewelry making class. So I sort of came about it like accidentally. It wasn't necessarily like a passion that I had for a long time. It was just something I was interested in. And then when I took that class, I realized I had a talent. I loved it. My teacher kind of mentored me and said, you not only have talent, but you also have an eye for design. So you might consider pursuing this. So at that point, I was kind of like, oh, that's an idea. I thought I would maybe be a retail buyer or start my own boutique because I worked in fashion and put myself through college that way. And then people started to want to buy my jewelry like off my neck. So I was like, all right, well, I'll sell you a couple pieces of jewelry. That led into having like home trunk shows. That led into starting to sell to a couple of consignment galleries. And then eventually that rolled into me launching a business in 1998. So back then, the internet wasn't really around. It wasn't as easy to actually get in front of people. So you had to pick up the phone and call stores and try to get into stores because that's sort of how you grew your business. So I built that to about, over the course of 11 years, to about 350 stores internationally. By the end of my first business, Tracy Matthews Designs, I had done a little bit of e-commerce, but really the majority of my business was selling to other retailers who resold my work. And then I had a small sort of direct-to-consumer business. I closed that business down in 2009 to start a new jewelry business where I now design only really like high-end fine jewelry for private clients. And I work primarily, I design primarily engagement rings, and I have a great business doing heirloom redesign. One of the things, though, that happened throughout that whole process is when I started my business, I didn't really start it the right way. I just kind of was winging it along the way. And so as my business started to scale, because it's very different selling to one store than it is to 350 stores, I started feeling some growing pains. And, a few mistakes that I made in the beginning had a huge impact, 5, 8 years later. So it's really, now I teach people like it's really important to set it up the right way from the start, or as soon as you realize that you're kind of doing it, maybe doing it the wrong way, I guess I should say, because those changes in the early stages make a huge difference down the road in sort of how your business can grow. So when I restarted my business, I took everything I learned through that 11 years that I was in business for Tracy Matthews Designs, and I was able to scale and grow my business really, really quickly. And within 18 months, I booked my first $30,000 in profits a month. And that was back in, I think, 2011 or 12. And that was a huge accomplishment for me because even though I was doing close to $1 million in revenue in my first business at the height of my business, I never had that sort of profitability because profits are very different than sales, right? So it was a really great ride. And around that time, I was getting a lot of people asking for consulting or to work with me one-on-one. And that's sort of how Flourish and Thrive Academy evolved. I wanted to make it like create an affordable, and I say affordable because what I was charging for consulting that time was like $1,000 a month. An affordable solution where someone could learn sort of everything that you need to know about running a successful jewelry business by taking online courses or, accessing our free resources or whatever. So that's sort of my history in the jewelry business. I think you asked me how I started my first business, but I told you what happened with both.
Perfect. That's perfect. And I love your story because and I interviewed you before on Make Your Mentors, and I just loved hearing your story. And what's so interesting to me is because you see a lot of creatives go through this evolution where they start making something and they figure out how to sell it. And then once they find that thing that works, they can just scale it. And so I see, like, in the beginning, you kind of figured out, okay, well, I can sell at trunk shows. I can sell to my friends and family. And then, like, you had this, I imagine you had this click where you realized, well, if I want to make this a business, it has to be retail. And then you kind of ran with that. And then you pivoting again and going to kind of custom design, I think says a lot about finding the type of business you want to run because you like working one-on-one with people and like you want to create one really special thing. Whereas if your business is retail, you spend all of your time calling retailers and dealing with wholesale accounts and like your day-to-day life is like very different from, if you get to kind of create those one custom pieces.
Totally. And I think, the interesting thing is though, is like 50% or more of my client base actually comes from the internet. So it's all from driving traffic to my website. So it's sort of like kind of building an e-commerce business in a way, even though I'm not technically selling anything on my website. But when that evolution sort of came about, one of the things that I think one of my biggest business lessons as an entrepreneur and as someone who has started several businesses over my history is that we always have a choice to change our mind about what we want to do. So when something like we can do something for a long time, I think I really struggled with closing my first business, especially when it was struggling financially and wasn't making me happy anymore because of my ego attachment to like that, this is the definition of who I am. But, when we realize, that there is another way and we start to pursue like maybe a different direction that makes us happier, everything starts to open up. And, it's like when you follow your passion, the money will follow. You probably have heard that, but that ends up being what happens. So we always have a choice to sort of change our mind and pivot and move into a new direction as well, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. I remember when I was like 20 years old and I was working in a corporate like PR job. And I told one of my mentors, like, I'm so scared that I'm going to lose my job one day. And what will I do if I lose my job? And she's like, you'll figure something else out. Like you still have your skill set and like the way that you look at the world and like all of these things. So when you are thinking about changing your jewelry business or changing directions with it, it's like you still have all of your knowledge and all of your passion that you can apply to this new business. You're not losing that in and starting over. And so I think that's just such a great example.
Yay.
So
Thank you.
yes, what made you decide to focus on helping other jewelry designers? And how did kind of your coaching start out? And can you talk about kind of the different types of designers that you work with?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we focus specifically on jewelry, the jewelry industry. And the reason why I wanted to do that is when we were starting Flourish and Thrive Academy back in 2012, I think it was, Robin had worked with multiple brands. And I knew that my area of expertise was the jewelry industry. Like I kind of could figure out how to price a handbag or probably figure out how to price soap. But there's so many intricacies involved in jewelry specifically, as opposed to other products that, we felt like focusing just on this one niche was going to be better for our success and growth and actually like reaching the right people. And, we took a risk and we were right. It took a little bit longer to build probably than if we were to be helping like the general maker community or product-based businesses. But Flourish and Thrive sort of came about because, first and foremost, when I was starting a business, I used to say this in my head all the time. And I used to say this to my brothers and one of my sisters all the time. Like, I wish there was someone who could just tell us everything there is to do, because there's so much that comes up over time, right? you're like, oh, well, how do I handle this situation? And have someone, like a resource to go to. And so really, like, Flourish and Thrive started because it was something that I needed when I was starting out. And it wasn't until like probably, let's see, like 13 or 14 years after I'd started my first business that Flourish and Thrive Academy actually came about. And I mean, that's one of the things I love about the internet. We have this opportunity to reach so many more people nowadays than back then, because back then you'd have to hire a one-on-one consultant and it was expensive. And I did consider it several times. I finally did hire someone at one point for $1,500 a month. We hired them for 2 years. And that was, I mean, that was, even though my business was doing really high six figures in revenue, close to $1 million at one point. I think we hired them after that really big year. That was still a big investment for us every month because it's a product-based business. We're selling wholesale. Our margins aren't as high as selling direct to consumer. And, you know, it was a big chunk that we had to commit every month to doing that. And so when designers started coming to me, you know, I would get designers for like the last 20 years, I've been getting designers emailing me asking if they could take me to coffee or pick my brain. But, you know, we only have so much time in the day and we have to grow our businesses. I didn't have a lot of time with that. And, you know, in the beginning, like, I was flattered and I'd want to help, and I always want to help. But at a certain time, like, you know, they're asking a lot, and, you know, this is stuff that you put your blood, sweat, and tears into. And so I had to, you know, come up with these consulting packages. So we'd offer consulting packages to designers that would come in, and which I thought they were a very affordable rate for what they were actually going to get. And there was a lot of like, oh, we can't really do that. It's a big investment. Or what if 2 or 3 of us went in on the package and you group coached us? So I'm like, well, maybe there's a way that we can turn this into something that's a little bit more group. We can offer some free information for people who aren't really sure yet that they want to start a business. And we can really create comprehensive, basically, coaching packages or like programs that will like sort of walk them through everything there is to do. So that's sort of how the idea to start moving into that direction started, because like people were asking for consulting, but they didn't want the investment. And I had a couple of clients that I was working with, but, you know, like, they were getting distracted with life or other things and they weren't focused. And I'm like, you know, I really want to work with those people who are really focused and want to get to the next level. And they want to make it approachable. And I feel like if we were to build something where a lot of people could come into a community together and work together towards a common goal, there would be this almost like support system built in. Yeah. And so that's where this concept of the community came in, and it's been really great. That's awesome. It helps people, not to be cheesy, but flourish and thrive in their jewelry businesses. It's been pretty awesome.
Yeah, because I don't come from the jewelry background, and like I dabble in a lot of kind of creative business spaces. Yeah. And so I started researching kind of the blogs in the jewelry space and the people in the jewelry space and like who's talking, and it's like there's like 20 people yeah. who are like actively trying to help and share information. And I was blown away. And so there is very little information out there when you're getting started. And when I was digging in further, there's also all of these layers to the jewelry community where there are like hobbyists who make it at home, but like, are really talented. And then there are, you know, fine art kind of jewelry designers. And then there are like metalsmiths, you know, like I'm like seeing all these. So
it like runs the gamut.
And it's like there's
so many.
There's this huge industry of like all these different groups of people, and there aren't a lot of people out there trying to give them the information they need just to get started. And so it can be really overwhelming in the beginning to figure out just like what your next step is or where you want to focus. Or where you can fit. Yeah, go ahead.
There's this huge community of, I mean, I come from the fashion world. So when I started designing jewelry, I was working in a boutique. It was sort of the beginning of the independent jewelry scene. The owner of the store was buying brands like Erica Courtney and Karen Karch. And this was back in the early 90s, like early, like when boutique business was huge. And Bettina Duncan, these were all like hot LA designers that were like emerging on the scene, who are well known now. I mean, they're like really successful, have been in the industry for a long time. And so those were sort of the people that I wanted to model my business after, this independent brand that was like edgy and niche, but in the fashion industry where we're selling to stores and like boutiques and where trend was really, I mean, I wasn't a trendy designer. I would never have called myself that, but where we really fit into the fashion world. And then when, Etsy started, because I had a lot of people working with me when I lived in San Francisco. I had an office, and a designer who is now really successful, Vanessa Gade, was one of my it was her first like production job. And she had said, hey, you guys, I put my stuff on this platform called Etsy. It was like right when it first started. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, it's a place for art students to go put their jewelry. And now Etsy is like this huge thing. So, all these layers started to evolve, like the evolution of Etsy coming into town made it really easy into the internet, made it really easy for people who had a hobby designing jewelry or maybe went to school to get their product up really quickly and start selling right away. And that totally changed the game, because before it was like basically selling to galleries and stores. So my teacher, my mentor, Sue Dorman at Loyola Marymount University, was really an art jeweler. Like, she was all about the art, and art jewelers have a very different mindset because I've hired many of them, the jewelers who come into BFA programs and they study metal arts, sometimes through their masters, and they're not taught any business skills at school. And it's so crazy to me because a lot of these designers would come in and work for me, several of them, because when I moved out of San Francisco and ended up going to, am I still here? Ended up going to, moving to New York. Can you hear me still? I lost Cassie. Okay, Cassie's video is out. So you guys can still hear me. So let's, she's coming back in a second, so I'll just keep talking. So anyway, in that art space, because there were so many designers that would come to work with me and say, like, working for you has been the best business education that I've ever had, because I actually see what it's like to run a business. So it's like an interesting dynamic about how different types of people coming from different areas in the jewelry niche or the jewelry industry really have different sort of mindset and approach to building a jewelry business. And I can keep talking if you want me to. Can you guys hear me who are on the chat? If you can, just if you want to pop a question in the chat or something, I'm happy to answer. While Cassie's coming around. I know she was going to ask me some questions. I could just answer them. Okay. So a couple of the questions that she was going to ask was, okay, you're back. Yeah, I was going to start asking like questions. Were you able to hear me the whole time?
Yes, I could hear you the whole time. My video just shut off, and I was like,
okay,
frantically, the Wi-Fi cut out. Okay, I would love to dive into some of the mistakes you see designers make, because on your note about talking about how you kind of find someone that you aspire to be like, and you kind of build your business after that, or after that model. A lot of times we don't understand how a jewelry business is making money, or like how they price stuff, or why they're making money, and so we go into that blindly. So can you talk about some of the most common mistakes you see people make when they're kind of starting out?
Oh, so many. So the first and foremost, I think that they don't think of their business as a legitimate business. So they're mixing some of their personal finances with their business finances and just buying stuff out of their regular account. So even if you're just, starting a business, like sort of on the side, I'd highly recommend that you do a couple of bank account, a separate bank account from your personal account, and loan yourself some money into that account. Get a tax ID number and decide if you want to have a different corporate structure. To make it really easy, you could just call the IRS. You don't need to do anything if you're in the United States. Get a tax ID number. It's called an EIN. That's separate from your social security number that you can use to build your business. And you could just stay a sole proprietor in the beginning. That's probably the most cost-effective way. And get a wholesale or a resale license, so that you can buy materials at wholesale. Because if you're starting a business, even if you're small, some places will have minimums, but other places, they're willing to work with smaller vendors, and their minimum might be $50. But if you get that wholesale certificate that allows you to buy products at wholesale prices, you'll save a lot of money than buying things retail. You don't have to charge tax until you're actually selling the product. So those are like some of the business foundational stuff. Other stuff that I see designers making when they're wanting to start a business or develop a collection is that they're not thinking really holistically about design from like a 360 view. They're just making a bunch of things that they like that don't really make sense together. And it's a huge problem. And I would say one of the biggest, if you're having difficulty selling that and pricing, are two of the biggest reasons probably why your product isn't selling, because merchandising, from coming from the fashion world, remember, is a really important part of being able to sell product consistently over time, especially in this day and age of virtual platforms where people are looking at a body of work on a website or on Etsy or whatever, and they want to see the connection and what it matters. So if they just see one piece and there's something like that they like, and then there's something really different sitting right next to it, it's going to be confusing, and in most cases, people will not buy. So that's huge. There's a whole philosophy behind merchandising. People go to school for many years to learn this. I learned through the school of trial and error and actually running a business, but it's really important. And once I designed cohesive collections, it really changed everything. The next thing I think that people make is they don't understand how to price their jewelry properly. Oftentimes they're selling direct to consumers at a wholesale price and not at a retail price. And this is really important to understand, even if you think that you will never sell to a store, how to price your jewelry correctly, because you're doing yourself and the entire industry a disservice for selling it for underpricing your work. And same thing goes for overpricing your work. You want to make sure that it's priced right for perceived value, and so that you have enough margin so that if a store, let's say, like, I know a lot of people love the store Anthropology, but let's say Anthropology was creating a spin-off store that was going to be like, opening up 2 stores. They came to you, they loved your brand, and you're like, oh, I don't want to sell to stores, but they came to you and you're a super fan of their store and you wanted to be able to offer it. You have to have your pricing in the right way so that they can get in at a price that makes sense for them to be able to resell your product, and also so that you're not competing with them on your platform. And there's multiple other reasons why pricing your product the right way is important. And then the final thing, there's so many mistakes that I see people make, but the final thing is that I see a lot of people making who are trying to build a business, and this might be a little bit beyond the beginner stage, but I would say is that they don't know how to prioritize the right activities, and they have a really hard time managing their time. And that sounds like a weird thing, but I used to go into the office every single day. When I first started my business, I was married, and I was working off my the coffee table in my living room. When I quit my job, my husband was like, get out of the house, you got to get a studio. So I got a studio for $500 a month in an office building in San Francisco in Fisherman's Wharf area. And I'd go there every day, and I didn't know what to do. I would just show up. I'm like, well, I guess I'll make some stuff. And after a month, he's like, did you make any sales today? And I was like, no, I'm still fixing my collection. And then, another month would go by. Finally, after like 3 or 4 months, he's kind of like, you have to start selling something or else you have to get a job again. It's not like you didn't start a business to not make money. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess I got to kind of sell. So it's like figuring out like what it is that the things that need to happen at the beginning of the day that are the utmost priority that are going to move your business forward. Like that's a really important piece to growing a business and getting things done. You need a beautiful collection. You need to price your stuff right. You need to post on social media and all that stuff. But if you're not doing things that are actually going to make sales, then just keep it a hobby. Don't even bother. Because like if you're not willing to put yourself out there, it's not worth your time.
That's great. And I see it time and time again, people, when they start a business, you spend like the first few years figuring out how to make money, like how to turn your time into money. And then after that, you try and figure out like how to get more time in your day to like, there becomes a point in everyone's business where it's like your time's maxed out. And like, if you want to make more, you have to kind of figure out how to reshift.
Exactly.
And that time management can be really tricky. I want to thank you so much for doing this. This was awesome. Thank you to everyone who was able to join live.
Thanks, you guys.
We're going to send around a recording to everyone so you can watch this again. and links to all of Tracy's resources so you guys can go check that out. But thank you so
Awesome.
much, Tracy.
Yeah, you're so welcome, Kathy. Thanks for having me.
Yep, have a great day.
You too. Bye.